This conference will now be recorded.
let me get you.
You're on the agenda.
By the way, the microphone is unmuted.
All right.
But I'd say we think.
Everybody clean up your language. We're not on mute.
Feel free to help yourself, and just grab a seat there. Okay, all right.
Oh, there you go.
We ready? Okay, I'd like to call this meeting of CTAC to order. If you would, please call the roll.
Yes, before I start, just a reminder, we have a transcriptionist on the line. So it'd be very, very helpful if before you speak, try to get in the habit of saying your name, and then speak. Same thing for voting. I know we're all gonna kind of forget now and then, but please do your best. Presenters, also just a reminder, if you can do your best to kind of describe the images that you're showing, that would be really helpful as well. For a roll call from the city of Fredericksburg, Dave McLaughlin. Here. Josh Brock,
Present.
John Castellarin,
Here.
Matthew Rowe,
Here.
Patricia Encarnacion. She may be online. No, Kate's the only one online. Okay. From Spotsylvania, Neil Holleran. From Stafford County, Dave Swan,
Present.
Glenn Goldsmith, Sarah Durant, Hank Sharpenberg.
Here.
From Caroline County, Ken Pogue, Michael Hoyt, Justin Chenault. From King George County, Jaron Hayes. Here. Welcome, Jaron. He's our new CTAC member. Rob Gates, we just received notice that he resigned this week. At-large members, Larry Gross.
Here.
Rupert Farley.
Here.
Justin Savage. Rodney Thomas.
Here.
Tamara Banks.
Here.
And Jane Leeds, who's probably online. Yep.
Here.
And Jane is also one of our new CTAC members, as well as Tamara, so welcome to the three of you. And that concludes roll call, Mr. Chair, and we do have a quorum.
Great, thank you. My name is Hank Sharpenberg, and last meeting I became the new chair for CTAC, and the gentleman off to the side whose smile emanates through his mask, Dave McLaughlin, turned over the gavel to me. And so we have a lot of new faces. I hope you get to know everybody's face, hopefully without a mask, but I'll figure out what color mask you like, and then we'll correlate color and mask to faces, and hopefully I'll recognize everybody. We've got a lot to do tonight. You can see the agenda. There's some things that I wanted to bring up. We put those to the end of the meeting because we have a couple of presentations. And out of fairness to the presenters, we'd like to get those done first. So the first thing we'll attack is the approval of the minutes, and if we can call those up. Yep. Or first, approve the agenda.
Move to approve the agenda.
Second. Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve the agenda. All those in favor?
Isn't there discussion
Aye.
first?
Any opposed?
How about the discussion?
Say again,
You want a discussion?
is there any?
The motion was made, and before you take the vote, there's a discussion.
Okay, is there any discussion?
Yeah, I wasn't clear that the presentation was going to be moved up on the agenda. You mentioned wanting to get onto it forthwith. So in that end, maybe we should move the presentation to the next spot on the agenda.
You're talking about the Facebook presentation?
Yeah.
Let's see.
I don't know. I think that's on, yeah.
Well, A and B are both presentations.
You're talking about it in the interest of saving time for the people that are presenting. Yeah, that's probably a good idea, I would think. We usually offer that courtesy.
Yeah, I would like, please.
I'll amend my motion to make that change.
Okay, we'll just then move A and B up to right after the old business issue and the review of the policy meeting. Any questions on that?
Why not make it next on the agenda?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Why not make 8A next on the agenda?
Next on the agenda.
That's okay.
I have no problem with that. Anybody have an issue on that?
No.
All right, so as amended, do I have a motion that we approve the revised agenda?
So moved. I'll
Okay,
second it.
any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so let's go ahead and start off with 8A.
Would you like me to present them up there?
It's up to you. Be careful if you go that way, we do have a cord across the front of the room. Yeah.
Thank you.
Good evening, folks. My name's Stephen Haynes. I'm the Fredericksburg District Planning Manager at VDOT. And it's a pleasure to be here. I see some faces I know certainly Mr. Farley have seen a number of times. It's a pleasure to see some of you that I've never met before. I'm a 35-year veteran of VDOT. I've worked in engineering and planning all that time. I came here in '86. So my career is long, spans a lot of, you probably noticed that the title here is got the word history in it. If you're gonna call, right? So now we're gonna keep this very informal, mainly because some of the things I'm gonna be describing happened, 2 decades ago. And there may be someone here that recalls it better than I do. And if you catch me misleading you in some way, I'm not doing it intentionally, I just don't remember. But what I'd like to do is, well, just briefly, what we're going to talk about is what river crossings, exist, which have been proposed over the years, why some were built and some weren't, and so on and so forth. Because that is a topic that comes back up, periodically. At least every 5 years, we revisit river crossing projects. Interesting, this very day, as we look out here today, we see a new river crossing, at least one that exists, that's been supplemented significantly. And when I tell you that is part of the outer connector that opened today, you'll probably, if you know anything about the outer connector, you'll scratch your head. You're like, but I can explain that, and we'll see that in just a few minutes. If we could start with the outer connector timeline just briefly. The reason I brought this in is just kind of give you an idea of where we kind of started and where we've gone. In '93, we received approval to build a 136 interchange at Center from the FHWA. In that same year, we designed the interchange. The discussion, debate began about what could accompany this interchange. And the idea of a bypass around the Fredericksburg area was brought up. And there were different versions. There were ones that went east, ones that went west. They all crossed the river and tied back in somewhere down in Spotsylvania County. So you had a bypass from Stafford around across the river and then tied back down in Spotsylvania County. The northwest quadrant represents the portion that would have begun at the 136 interchange and would have come across and finished and ended at Route 3. The southwest quadrant that picked up there basically went down to the 126 or somewhere south of 126, and then you had the corresponding eastern 2 quadrants that were considered. The one that was tread where was the outer connector northwest quadrant and southwest quadrant combination. And then what I'll do now, rather than going straight through the history, we can jump over to the outer connector. We had this is from 2001, I believe, and this is one of our hearings, but it kind of shows where the whole outer connector idea went. And if we could go on down till we get to the maps. Like essentially, you can see the typical section with do a 4-lane divider, tying away with a raised median. But a number of options were looked at. Most of them were very simple. Corridor 1, the first corridor we looked at. You see the Centerport interchange. This location here, this is Holly Corner Road, so we could cross Route 17 in Stafford, somewhere near Holly Corner, come down across the Rappahannock River, and swung out near the Battlefield Park and tied in on Route 3 west of Lick Run. So that was number one. You can see number 1A was just exactly the same to here and a variation down here in the Spotsylvania County area. It was mostly, it was to move further away from the park. So as you roll on through the next one, you'll see that this looks just like it. It's just a variation, 1B. It looks somewhere in between. It came back tied back in with the first one, kind of avoided. So you just kept seeing more and more alternatives introduced in this area. You can see it looks like an octopus here. And then the same thing here, although this one actually took a little diversion up here in Stafford and went south to Holly Corners to the north. But it was just most of these were a combination of, beginning at Stafford, crossing 17 west of where the Walmart is now, and tying in somewhere on Route 3 west of Grandeur Drive. And so on we go. Something different, right? Quarter 3 was when it was much closer in, and there's been some little scuttlebutt around about this particular option or variation of it here recently, I've heard. This one, rather than going out to Korea, would have tied in somewhere in the neighborhood of where Celebrate Virginia Parkway starts now. There was no Celebrate Virginia Parkway when we were talking this, right? It hadn't been built yet. It would have crossed somewhere in that area, and then it would have come down across the Rappahannock, just to the east of Mott's Reservoir, and it also avoided the Rocky Ken Run Reservoir, which hadn't been built the other time, to the east instead of the west. You can see that that's this area and this area. And then it would tie back in somewhere again back in that area west of Ford Road. So that one was a true alternative to the other, not just some variation. Then you have quarter 4. We're back up doing the same thing again. But because quarter 4 sort of meant a whole different set here. We said, okay, we need to kind of come up with a, here's our baseline now, it's quarter 4 rather than quarter 1. But again, very similar to quarter 1. 4A, more the same, right? 4B, well, it doesn't look all that different. But you can see it's just so much debate about things. There's your residential areas. Again, you have the Battlefield Park. You had the logic of where you wanted to tie in Route 3 to get the most use, so on and so forth. Then we finally get to quarter 5. And this is a statement I made earlier about how we just saw part of the Interconnector open because of this. This one had 3 components. It had this segment up here that picked up its Center interchange and went over to the Berea area on 17. And that was it. Basically, this was your 17 bypass. Would have allowed a number of things. It certainly would have allowed people that would look down direction coming off 17 to swing on up here and not have to go through the heavily developed commercial area on 17 and go down to 133. It also consisted of a Route 3 bypass. And this would have had to have an interchange somewhere in some park area near the rest area that would have come off and then tied out probably in the area of Morton Road, perhaps a little further west. And that became something else further along. We'll talk about in a few minutes. But the third component that's not so obvious on here was just improvements along 95, a collector distributor system. And you can see again, that's what we built out here just recently on the southbound river crossing. And in the next 2 years, we'll see the same thing on the northbound side. And that's the section. So essentially what we're seeing built out there is a portion of Interconnector quarter 5 right now. And of course, the idea with this was anyone who's simply objected to a new location. And there's a lot of reasons to object to new locations, right, Mr. Paul? Sometimes you don't want to build a road. Maybe it's a better idea. Maybe it is better to keep things in that same corridor rather than push them out into a whole new virgin area and destroying whatever things highways destroy, right? So this was the alternative for those who preferred that type of facility. But the bottom line was we recognized that long ago that we needed another river crossing. One of the things you notice about river crossings in the Fredericksburg area, everybody knows about Fredericksburg here, right? It's fall line. Those ocean-going vessels could navigate to Falmouth and to Fredericksburg. So the city was built more here, just like Fredericksburg. So these cities lined the East Coast like that, and they were connected by roadways. And so it's understandable that commerce, population, everything is centered along that. Interesting though, it's hard to push those roads out beyond that because it's hard to invest in areas where you know you're not going to get as much use, and you're not going to get as much use where you don't have as many people. And what we wound up with here in the Fredericksburg area is, you know, there's, yes, Stafford County, Spotsylvania County, Fredericksburg County in the middle. The Rappahannock River running along the way. West of Fredericksburg, Spotsylvania and Stafford border is about 10 miles long. Then you get to Fredericksburg, you have about 6 miles that are between Stafford and Fredericksburg. Then you get east of Fredericksburg, you're back to Stafford, Spotsylvania again for another 7 miles, 6 miles. I think it's 10, 7, and 6, something like that. So that's 16 miles of the border between Spotsylvania and Stafford. About 7 miles between Stafford and Fredericksburg. All of the river crossings go from Stafford to Fredericksburg. There are no crossings that land in Spotsylvania anyway. So you have 995, multiple lanes of 95. You have Route 1, the FAMPO Bridge, Chatham Bridge, Bloom Gray Parkway. All go from Stafford to Fredericksburg. Some people like that. I see folks in Pennsylvania like, yeah. Some are like, you know, we really like to be able to, you know, get there without going all the way through over to 95. So depending on who you are and what your perspectives are, you know, you either like this one or you like the other one or you don't like any of them. There was a lot of debate. Now, we could go back to the first slide that we had. And you can get through this, you know, this is available if you want to read it. But anyway, we got down into this section right here, like, oh, like, let me see these a little bit more. Commonwealth Transportation Board selected a corridor, 4 new corridors were created, so on. This is what I'd already described to you a little earlier. It will on up to, okay, here we go. We selected 1B, we, you know, it's back and forth all over the place, but eventually, we got into the localities and where they stood on it. Stafford Board Supervisors favored out of connect. Pennsylvania voted unanimous to remove this. Now, Fredericksburg voted unanimously to oppose the connect, but they had done that all along. Because at that time, basically Fredericksburg didn't really want to see people driving outside the city. They wanted to make sure they stayed here because, you know, there's stuff you need to do in Fredericksburg. So they were never really in favor of it. But as you know, at FAMPO, if you have Spotsylvania and Stafford, but now it's different. You've got Spotsylvania saying, okay, we're not interested anymore. What happened there? I'll leave to you and the friends and your friends at Spotsylvania to debate that. I'm not going to touch on the politics of it, but they lost their project right out of connectors off. So a number of years later here, we can wheel down and see that George Washington Toll Authority came about. George Washington Toll Authority was actually something that the General Assembly of Virginia had to approve. And created this George Washington Toll Road Authority to create this potential section. You know, we looked at the alternative 5 out of Connector to build it. Kind of hard to see here, but this is north on this map. Look at this one first. You can see this is 17, it's north here, and here's the river, here's City of Fredericksburg, here's the rest area, ballpark's right here now. So anyway, it's going to tie in the CD roads, bring this across the river, much like what we just built, and continue an interchange that would feed to the west. Now, this sits up here like this. This map knows this way on this one, and this map picks up here, and there were a couple different options, but it ties in out here at Gordon Road. And this was approved, and it got some traction. And you can see that the studies were done, so on and so forth. You roll down here and you'll see something you've seen before. The Spotsylvania Board of Supervisors passed a resolution indicating withdrawal of sports control. So once again, that one came and went. And you can read what happened here if you want. So another one, like that. So in 2013, this is, I was working in planning at the time and was assigned to project management of this. And basically, the district administrator at the time, Cornelius, told me to go find everything that's ever been studied about river crossings and put it into one study, and let's see how it kind of comes out. let's, throw it all in, run it through the program and see where our preferred alternatives are. And we looked at a lot, and we invited new input. A lot of our FAMPO member, policy committee members gave us ideas. One of which, Mr. Ross, I'll tell you that because he's proud of it, and it's a good idea, was to go as far west as you could and stay out of Spotsylvania completely. Right? So he introduced this idea. And then the folks from Stafford said, well, no, wait a minute, we like to go right down through Spotsylvania. It got kind of silly. And I don't know, when you ask somebody to draw a line and tell us what you want to do, sometimes it gets way outside of what you want, because we weren't trying to manage traffic going out here to the west. We were trying to come up with a river crossing and help folks in Pedestrian. But again, it depends on your perspective. And I respect everyone's perspective. But it's good when you quantify it. So that's what this study was to do. Quantify the benefits and the costs and see which one you come up with. And you can see we were looking once again at the Eastern bypass that would have crossed here near New Post, out in the 17. So you'd have the west eastern interconnector. This kind of moved further out. On the original outer connector, you would have followed the power line basically down through, out into Spotsylvania Park again. But this is further south, new interchange area down here. So a lot of things were being suggested, but they were lots of miles. And that obviously, that's where it becomes difficult, because you start looking at how many people would use it, what would it cost. The cost benefit is kind of, it's lower. Yeah, but these are the ones we look at. You can see here, there's a little tiny window here that shows some of what we were looking at, again, with an interchange in the area, the rest area, and Central Park, Celebrate Virginia South, that would also be a part. Well, the ones that were ultimately selected, and most beneficial, having the highest benefit cost ratio, were not unsurprisingly this section, the bypass 17, this section that bypassed Route 3, and the crossing of the river, which was alternative out of the outer connector originally, or as a second recommendation, the outer connector northwest quadrant, which was again one of the earlier versions we looked at. And we showed the cost. They're similar. You're looking at basically $750 million at that. And you can see what the benefits were. And here, because of the two that were determined to have the most benefit based on everything we looked at. And again, in addition to these new ideas I just came up with, the least amount of miles to do the most benefit. So that was pretty much the last thing that was discussed. You will on up. So where do we stand today? We're seeing something built that was a part of it. So it's not like we haven't taken some of this guidance and put it out on the ground. And we're going to continue to do that as we see the northbound river crossings constructed as well. What is next? That's going to be up to you guys and folks in the various localities, citizens. VDOT, our role used to be to push these things along. Now we tend to be pushed along just because policies have changed. For example, smart scale. The money that goes into construction now is applied for by the localities and the various entities that are qualified applicants for smart scale. If you guys come up with that idea, we'll help you along. We'll advise you, say, this will work, or here's what it might cost. But it's a good thing to have that information coming from the users and localities and the people's voice. So that's where we are now. So we guys, we take a little more of a back seat in these things than we used to do. So I stand here to answer any questions you might have regarding river crossings. Pretty much told y'all I can tell you about. Yes, sir.
I guess the first question is, for crossing the Rappahannock, is there a federal component required for approval, or is that strictly state?
In almost any case, when you're talking about the funding that will be involved to build any kind of river crossing, it would involve federal funding and require executive approval, particularly on the interstate system. So yes, I would say it's possible, certainly, to build a bridge across. But then you also have environmental protection in place, all sorts of historic resources, wetland resources, and all of these come into federal control.
So you have to do the environmental impact assessment and all the rest of it.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Stephen, this question of information from me. Looking at those various maps, 10 maps or so you got there, which was the last version that the CTB approved? Because I know they've had a role in this over time. So I don't know the answer to this question. I'm genuinely interested which of those alternatives was the one the CTB voted for.
Well, when we saw the outer connector, we actually got into the environmental assessment on basically what is this alignment here.
Okay.
That was approved, and we sunk quite a bit of money into the environmental assessment before it was rejected, by the localities. So this one, approval at that time. Now, obviously, it's 2 decades ago. We have to go back and look at it again. As far as this one, it would be this, because we had the George Washington Toll Authority, which was approved through the General Assembly. And
So those two were at some point approved by the CTB.
yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
So I got a couple questions. So every alternative that we saw throughout the last 30 years, they've all been limited access, controlled access, exits on, exits off. Was there anything with at grade intersections, or was that just deemed to be impractical?
Some of these were not defined at that level when we were studying. Certainly anything that followed along 95 CD lanes, et cetera, would fall into that limit, right? Most of the assumptions about connected were that it would be limited access or controlled access. In most cases, we want to have separated grades regardless, just for the efficiency of it. But like when we were discussing more recently, this is something I didn't mention, is that Stafford County actually went back and looked at what they called Stafford Overbury Parkway, which ran from the 136 over 17 independently. And they looked at a number of ways it could be funded, number of ways it could be restricted, what types of vehicles, would it be trucks allowed, only trucks allowed, what would the tolls be, and so on and so forth. And one of those was, the debate was, do we make it totally limited access? Do we put access going in like you see here, represented by that? Well, multiple access. So that level of detail was not usually touched upon, but again, by and large, it was assumed limited access.
Okay. My other question was, so when you cross the bridge at 95, it's also US 17. There's concurrence. How much traffic using that portion of 95 is 17 traffic? Do you know that? How much of it is Warrenton to Port Royal and vice versa?
I don't know the answer to that, but if I think it through, I can probably give you a pretty good idea, but I'd rather actually look that up for you and return to this, you and the committee. So I got it as accurate as possible. It's not always the easiest thing to determine. What you do see, of course, in the Fredericksburg area is a lot of this, which is what we're working on out there right now. Where this big backward C that you have here, because the majority of the population, the commutes, for example, lives down here to the west. Up here, you have 17, and the fact that it's a connection roadway that goes throughout the southeastern United States. And so you have a lot of traffic that, does that comes down here and exits to the 126 and heads on that, or most of it just heads on down 95, because the portion that goes down through the north or through the middle peninsula doesn't have anywhere near the volume you have here. So 95 is really the ultimate destination.
We were just watching that traffic on the screen when we arrived.
Yes, very interesting little phenomenon going on there. We'll have that fixed, I hope. But, it never stops. And I know that a lot of folks will say, well, you just move the problem. And that's sort of what you saw there, right? You saw the problem move from up here and it's down here, and it's going to continue to move. And we're going to continue to react by having the improved facilities. And we understand that, there's the whole concept, the philosophy of you can't build your way out of congestion. But indeed, we do know some of our problems, and we can pinpoint our choke points, our congestion issues, and there are some places where nothing less than additional lane is really going to help. One of those, that you'll probably hear debated, because there'll be an application from SmartScale through, is it FAMPO or DWC, that will propose a 4-lane southbound between the 130 and the 126. When these improvements are done that you're seeing out here today, next year the southbound will be completed. Then 2 years from then, you'll see the northbound river crossings complete. There will be a choke point, particularly in the southbound direction, where all the 6 lanes come back to 3, right? I mean, obviously, that's a problem. So, that's the next step, would be to improve that. Because the 126 southbound, you have a great divergence of traffic, particularly the PMP, which is your highest volume. So once you get through 126, we can get that done. We would actually see a whole lot freer flow for a whole lot more hours. I'm not going to say there's not going to be incidents and there's not going to be daily congestion. There will certainly be that. Yes, sir.
To your knowledge, have there been any other extensive studies on this issue other than, let's say, the Stafford Parkway study in 2013?
No, just because, remember, this was actually looked at in 2013. The Stafford Parkway study was similar time frame as that, maybe 2014 or 15. It was a little bit.
Yeah, I've got a copy.
Yeah, so, there really hasn't been anything looked at, on a regional basis as far as a bypass or additional river crossing, anything that would attempt to take traffic off of the 95 corridor.
And the follow-on question is for Ian. Is there anything in that master list for a study, either caretaker status, excuse me, push out into the out years or semi-active now?
Some of you indicated that the list of projects does include another river crossing / Interconnector in the East-West Mobility Study, but it was not ranked by the representatives of the 3 jurisdictions as a #1 project. They pushed it down to sort of a #2 or 3 project. In other words, it's in there, and we'll ask the consultants to come and look at it, but it's not in their sort of top tier priority items in the list. So public document is on the website.
Yeah, and the reason I ask is if it's in there, it's a question of getting, excuse me, people to agree to reprioritization. But it is in the list.
It is in the list.
Okay.
Bearing in mind that the politicians have spoken on the topic, only the officials and staff from the jurisdictions and from the state partners.
Understand.
So we've not asked for the opinion of the politicians, because I'd rather do some study before I ask them for opinion on options.
And one thing we have found in the East-West study, neither East, West, nor South operate in a vacuum. Obviously, a whole lot of trips that go north-south begin with East-West and vice versa. So it's a unique look, though, to focus on East-West. I like that, and particularly the aspect we're looking at now with the transit and all of it. Some of the, what things can we do, to get people east and west versus, we know that they're all going to eventually, a lot of them are going to go north and south. But what about across 95? So interesting. It'll be interesting to see. We were talking percentages here. I was asked a question about how many folks coming down 17 and following the overlap. Actually, what is the percentage of? It's a similar kind of question. How many people traveling east from west actually get on 95 and stay on 95 to get to their destination? How many actually want to cross? And if facilitation were better, if transit were better, would those numbers change?
We're certainly going to employ a consultant to model all of those projects that we've got on that list. So they're going to build onto the regional model each one of those items and say, if we build this, what will be the impact? Or if we widen this road, what will be the impact? So they will actually model those options. And as Stephen says, that, did you call it the C movement?
Yeah, that backward C.
Or the U movement, the backward C movement is clearly part east-west movement and part north-south movement. So you certainly have to consider the impact of those on each other, right? It's not a one thing.
No, I understand. But the reason I bring it up is you were all witness to the catastrophic events, 2 of them in the last couple of weeks. One, 95 shutting down because of silliness, which will occur in the future. It didn't matter how many lanes crossed 95 at their current location. 95 shutdown. And so there is a choke point which will continue to exist. And so north-south has to be integrated with east-west. And personally, I applaud the additional lanes that are opening up on the Rappahannock. But as you saw in the video, live feed, it's only going to mitigate the problem. It's not going to solve the problem. Then the second catastrophic issue was the head-on collision on 17 that shut that down for most of the day. And so we are in an unusual location that we are subject to stupidity, terrorism, acts of God, you name it, but there is no room for failure. And so that's why I made the statement at the last meeting that we really have to reinvigorate options so that people are not stuck using 95 to get inside of Stafford County, and I would assume in around Spotsylvania also. And the folks at Fredericksburg don't plan on going anywhere, as you see when we have these kind of traffic issues. So that was my focus last time, and I just wanted to reinsert that into this discussion because we definitely need to examine the east-west options, but without an additional north-south option and not in the same location, I think there is going to be an issue. I didn't mean to take up your time. Thank you.
Could we go back to the map that shows all the options? I think that will do. I was here during these discussions when all this happened the first time, and there was one little bit that Stephen didn't mention, and that was the difference in congestion relief of different priorities. Now, Corridor 5, which is these two pieces here, that got the most congestion relief of all the options. Corridor 3 gave you the most congestion relief for the buck. Corridor 1 gave you the least congestion relief. But Corridor 1 was the favorite of the home building lobby. And the home building lobby has got a lot of contributions in Richmond. So lo and behold, Corridor 1 was the choice.
From a planning point of view, as a planner and not a politician or a home builder, those two options, and an outsider too, so I don't have vested interest in this. Those two options that are the furthest west make the least sense to me because they serve the least people. They spur urban sprawl, and the red one isn't even inside FAMPO. It's not even in our jurisdiction.
Yeah, that's ridiculous.
Yeah, so I understand your comment exactly, and that's one of the reasons why I think we need to transition to an advocacy group to strip away all of that baggage that exists out there, whether it's the home building lobby or other folks who have hidden agendas, because I think our mission is to serve our citizens and give them some alternatives from their perspective and not from people with deep pockets in Richmond. And I'll stop my proselytizing on that.
I have a question. Maybe you can answer it, maybe you can answer it, or maybe some of the people on the committee can answer. When we get these rejections from these localities, like the one from 2012 from Spotsy, they're rather vague and they lump every possible reason why they don't want to do it, and it's like the historical, the environmental, everything. Do we really know why these things are being rejected? In 2013, on the timeline, doesn't even tell us why it was rejected. Do we have? I mean, how does anybody respond saying we can make this plan better if we don't know what the localities are actually complaining about?
Stephen will give you a more objective outsider's perspective of someone who has lived through it. My own perspective, which I would regard as more subjective and I wasn't around, is that there is an additional item not mentioned in the text, which is this, that when you build one of those routes, there are a certain number of private homes which are going to be impacted. Whether it's because the highway has to be built right next door to their home, or whether their home in fact needs to be demolished to get the right of way. I don't know. but there's a certain number of private homes on each of those alignments, which would be impacted. And remember, the people that voted no are the political representatives of those communities. And so if you're going to bulldoze my home, and I don't want to move, I'm going to get all of my local board of supervisors politicians, and I'm going to harass the hell out of him or her until they go to the meeting and vote no. So remember that it's not expressly stated in some of those documents, but there is that problem that if you bulldoze my home, I'm going to go to my local county supervisor and complain and maybe offer, to back the next election campaign or whatever the hell it is to get that person to vote no if my home is impacted. So that's one of the problems that you have. And while FAMPO is a regional body, in other words, we don't pick a locality, we're for all the localities. The boards of supervisors are not. They are representatives of a local community. They get elected by a local community. They're answerable in a way to that local community. And if that local community has got enough local advocates who are going to be impacted by a particular alignment, and they stand up and complain enough, they may very likely get those board of supervisors to vote no again. So that is one of the factors, but it doesn't really get put in writing the way that I'm expressing it. However, Stephen, who maybe has been living through it a lot longer than I have, might have a different perspective, but that's one of the items that kind of picked up through the discussion.
Well, Ian, I asked Andrew Matthews to return to this, because as you know, the Interconnector, when we were studying it 20 years ago, it eventually was brought to its death by the board of supervisors of Spotsylvania, deciding that they don't want to support it. But you can kind of see that coming when you look at what was going on with the alternatives here. You see all these alternatives. Obviously, there was a problem out there trying to pick a corridor that would satisfy people. National Park Service is over there. Some folks you don't, not only do you not touch the National Park Service or battlefields, you have to give yourself a 2-mile, 5-mile push. So you had that. You were in a very heavy residential area in there, as Ian pointed out. You're in your backyard now. So anywhere you go, and the further we get into time, the more development occurs, it becomes more difficult to find a new alignment. But that is a lot to do with what happens. Like there's 6 or 7 different alternatives that we were looking at just for where to terminate that particular route on Route 3 West. So that's your point is exactly right. And the boards change, so you can have full support by one board, and it changes around, flips around, and it's done. It's gone. And you know what? It'll come back or not. So politics.
If this were easy, we wouldn't have to be here. I totally recognize it, but any other questions?
Thank you all for the
Thank you very much for the presentation.
Stephen, that was an excellent presentation. I learned something. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, I asked Joe Breeder to come up and talk about something that he has been pitching. So that everybody is clear, there is no approved solution to any of this, but there are some variations that you should hear about and consider in your bag of options to look at.
All right, thank you for having me. My name's Joe Brito. I'm from Stafford, and I represent over 3,700 people that want a regional approach to planning. They sign petitions specifically for what I call an interconnector and regional trail network. Okay, can we get my screen, please?
Yeah, which one? The basic presentation?
Yes.
Or the- Okay.
Okay, 25 years ago, I was on the Transportation Advisory Group. Basically, it's the same group here that has changed the name. And we discussed the outer connector thoroughly for years, actually. And we each got a copy of the study, and I looked at the study. And I studied it over and over again, and I couldn't figure out why the transportation board and the localities picked corridor 1. So I had to do a little bit more research. So anyway, my research goes back to the 80s. So basically in the 80s, there was a supervisor named Phil Horno in Stafford, and he wrote a book called The Corridor. So his proposal was for a beltway around Fredericksburg, and the corridor would open up the center of Stafford County for economic development, and they put an airport there. So that's what it all started out, and it started getting some traction. It was put in the comprehensive plan for the beltway, and I don't know if any of you heard of Roger Staubach from the Dallas Cowboys. Well, he was an early investor in the airport. So it really got a lot of traction then. You know, people were excited. We got, this Dallas Cowboy wanting to invest in Stafford. So anyway, that's where it all started. And in 1988, the comprehensive plan was approved. But in my opinion, the problem with the plan was the Beltway encouraged the growth to start outside and move in. So in a good comprehensive plan, you want the growth to start in the center and gradually move out. That way, the infrastructure costs are lower and so forth. So the plan was approved, and next thing you know, dozens of developers took advantage of it, saying, well, we're gonna be right on this road. So all these rezonings happen, and there was proffers for the interchange. There was proffers for the outer connector, right away. But let me go, and then in 1990, the county did a study with Patton Harris Russell Associates for the outer connector, for where it would cross, river crossing. And the situation was that the study recommended that it go down and be part of Holly Corner Road. So the first mile of Holly Corner Road would be part of the outer connector, and then Stafford Lakes would connect to it, and Westlake over here would connect to it, and that they might even connect down here further. And it would be Holly Corner Road, and it would come down and cross over here. Okay, the situation was that the Ward Corporation owned this stretch of land here, and they didn't want the outer connector going straight through their property. So what they did, they proffered the right-of-way right next to a stream and wetland area. So there's 190-foot right-of-way here. That's why this is here. Okay, the right-of-way proffer expired about 10 years ago. So anyway, so that's where we are now. And anyway, when this study was done, keep in mind that Celebrate Virginia Parkway wasn't built. The Carl Silver Parkway was just started. I think it didn't even go to Falls or Fall Hill Avenue yet. The Mine Road Extension project was in the early comprehensive plan. Well, it still is in the comprehensive plan in 1988. And the proposal was for Mine Road to come down and connect with Enon Road, and then it would connect to another road that would be south of Enon. The problem was the developer that owned the land here didn't own the land south of Enon. So there was like 3 parcels there. So instead of connecting straight to Enon, he offset it by about 1/8 of a mile to the west. So when you go up Plantation now, you have to make a right on Trustwell and go up. So it really pretty much blew the plan. But since 1988, it's been in the comp plan to connect, and really not feasible. And if you looked at the crash data and in the area, it's not a good place to direct more traffic and high crashes. There's also a lot of driveways on Enon and a lot of intersections on Plantation. So they'd just be littered with traffic lights, and you don't want to do a 4-lane road that all, the 50 driveways are going to be taking lefts going across 2 lanes of traffic. It's not it's not safe, and it's not a good setup for traffic flow. So anyway, so this section is pretty much obsolete. Okay. Now, after looking at this, one thing the Interconnector study said was, when it was done, the city's river intakes for the water supply was downstream of 95. So this study said that approximately 4 times a year that the city had to turn off their intakes because of chemical spill, the threat of chemical spills on I-95. 4 times a year they had to shut down their intakes because of threats. And some of them might have spilled, some didn't. But anyway, so the city moved their intakes up to Mott's Run, upstream, so it avoided that, so they have no problem there. So the situation here is all these corridors out west are upstream from 2 river intakes. So if there's a chemical spill on the bridge, then those intakes are going to be impacted. Now, corridor 3 is south, and it doesn't impact it. As a matter of fact, corridor 3 doesn't go through the Able Lake watershed. It avoids the Rocky Pen watershed, and it pretty much avoids the Mott's Run watershed.
Well, which one is corridor 3?
Yeah, corridor 3. It's the orange one right here, corridor 3. So it basically avoided all the water supply watersheds and the 2 river intakes. Okay. Now, corridor 3 cost the least to build. Okay. It impacted the least amount of wetlands. Corridor 1 cost a lot more than corridor 3, impacted the most wetlands, and that's what the localities picked. Corridor 1 crossed the most streams. Okay, and corridor 1 was parallel to the river for about a mile, so it had more impact on the river than the other crossings. With sound impacts and so forth, and if there's any spills, there'd be more chance it would hit the river. So, and then if you looked at the traffic count data on corridor 1, the traffic counts say corridor 1 would have 50,300 trips a day on Route 3. Corridor 5 would have 72,900 trips a day. So corridor 5 actually had more trips a day on Route 3 than corridor 1. But corridor 3 had the least amount of traffic trips a day on Route 3. The least amount, corridor 3, right here.
So we pointed to the green one, but you said a moment ago that the orange one is corridor 3.
No, the orange one is corridor 5.
Okay.
And if you looked at the traffic counts for Route 17, corridor 1 had a traffic count of 24,800 from this point to here. Corridor 3 had the least traffic account from this point to here. I guess the fact is that the closer you got to 95, the more people would use the road. The further out you go, less people would use it. I think I pretty much covered that. Go ahead, next page, please. Okay, and here's the study done in 2013. This corridor, I think this is what's favored by Spotsylvania, but frankly, I think it's too far out. I don't think it's going to be used a whole lot. And politically, it's great for them because they don't have any heat. You know? But anyway, the thing about this corridor 7 here, it crosses 2 rivers. And it crosses upstream of Huntington Run. So then you got 3 water intakes on the river that it would impact. So and the cost is a lot more. Now the study did have a river crossing right here, 1.6 mile river crossing. And can you go to the next page? Okay, so basically the 1.6 mile river crossing was alternative 3, and the estimated cost was 104 million. It had some green marks, but I think it should have had more green marks to it. And and any of the river crossings had red marks on conservation easements and the scenic river designation. So the bridge had 2 red marks, but it shouldn't have any relocations at all. One thing about the river crossing is that it doesn't impact a single house between Route 17 and Route 3. No houses impacted, no businesses impacted. So I don't even know why they had a little mark there. I guess because it goes by some houses and they get the traffic noise. But so the river crossing itself, no impacts. And the thing about it is where it's at, there's no traffic calming measures that has to be done, no traffic control. There's no utilities, so it keeps the cost down considerably and they can build it a lot faster. Now, if you look at the other corridors, like Corridor 6 is one that they were eyeing. It has a lot of relocations and scenic and conservation easement. Now, I'm going to tell you the river crossing for Corridor 3, just the bridge alone, it does impact the river, but it's on 2 bends in the river. So it's not going to be seen a whole lot on the river because of the bends. And the bends will also keep the noise down. Then if you put a scenic overlook on the bridge, then more people will actually see the scenic beauty of the Rappahannock than what would go underneath. So I think that would mitigate the impacts. Okay, next page, please. Okay, this is the 1.6 mile from Celebrate Virginia Parkway in Stafford, and it would connect to Gordon Shelton Boulevard. Okay, next page. Okay, now this is Stafford Route 17. Sorry, the picture didn't come out too good, but this is just an example of the mitigation measures for all the traffic. The traffic is going to come out here and it's going to be split up, diffused in many different ways. You've got an underpass here, so you can avoid left turns on Route 17. You got 3 different intersections that the traffic will split up in the different intersections, so it diffuse the traffic. So the traffic should flow pretty good. There's also another intersection over here at McWhort Loop. Okay, next page, please. Okay, on Carl Silver Parkway and Fall Hill Avenue intersection. Now this intersection is 33 lanes. It's the biggest intersection in the region. It can handle more traffic flow than any other intersection. And it's designed well with these ramps and so forth, so traffic can flow smoothly. And it's one of two intersections where the traffic would be diffused. Now, the city of Fredericksburg, actually, some of the planning staff was talking about the Shelton Boulevard at 6 lanes, and they need more parking for the stadium. So they were considering, they said the 6 lanes are overbuilt, and they were considering making it 4 lanes and using the other 2 lanes for parking. I think that would be a disaster. I mean, you already got the infrastructure there. And that's the point. We got $100 million and over $100 million in infrastructure, and we're sitting in gridlock. And this infrastructure is underutilized. So I really have a problem with that. Next page, please. Okay, and here is the proposal for the interconnector and trail network. I say trail network because there's a series of trails it would connect to. And I think the East Coast Greenway Trail could be next to the road. There's already trails there. So anyway, the yellow sections are the existing roads. Berea Church Road is an existing road, but it would have to be rebuilt. So we basically have 5 different roads, and if you include the Spotsylvania Mall Road, there's a road that goes around the mall. That's 6 different roads. So basically, what I did was I took a modified version of Stafford's comprehensive plan, and I modified it because the Mine Road extension wasn't lining up right, and I thought this would be a better version of it. And we're using existing infrastructure to keep costs down, keep environmental impacts down, keep impacts on private property down, and it can be built in phases and a lot quicker. So these blue sections would be the phases. And anyway, the situation is we basically only have 2 north-south regional roads in the Fredericksburg area, but we have 10 east-west roads, and the 10 east-west roads have 34 lanes. The 2 north-south roads that we have with the bridge opening today have 13 lanes. The 13 lanes going north and south, 34 lanes going east and west. So what our problem is, we don't have enough north-south roads. And the situation is if we try to build more lanes on Route 1, we put 4 more lanes on Route 1, we'd probably knock out 100 businesses. And it would be a nightmare having to deal with the traffic during construction. Businesses would close up because of the impacts of the construction alone, and there'd be traffic delays. So, and just 1 mile of Route 1 widening in Woodbridge cost $187 million. 1 mile.
And I just want to remind everybody that given the hot lane contract, you would be required to compensate the hot lane owners for any widening on 95 or Route 1. So there's additional cost involved.
Okay, yes, well, exactly. And we have to compensate them for about 80 more years. So you could be talking billions of dollars in that time period. Anyway, not only am I proposing the road, but I'm also proposing the East Coast Greenway Trail to go with it. let me go over the benefits of this. Okay, I'm basing a lot of this information on the outer connector study. Okay. This is a 15-mile road. It would go from Route 610 all the way to Harrison Road. I would have continued it south further, but there's a subdivision there, and I'm not going to propose to hit the subdivision. Now, one reason why I modified this, actually, could we go back a few to the first slide?
All the way back to the first.
Yeah. Okay. Now, if you look at corridor 3, it goes slightly west of Berea Church Road. And the reason why it does that is it avoids a subdivision here and avoids about 14 houses here and a graveyard. So I modified it. Instead of going this way, see, the problem was there's an industrial park here. So that was probably a big factor why they didn't even consider it back then, because it went through an industrial park. So I modified it to come over and hit, go on Berea Church Road from this point to become Berea Church Road. Celebrate Virginia Parkway wasn't built yet, but it's built pretty much in this area. So, and it will be used, but the river crossing would be over here on two bends of the river instead of there.
Joe, if I can ask you to hold it there, and if anybody has any questions, just in the interest of time, if there's something you'd like to ask Joe concerning what he's done.
Yeah, I have a question. This is Josh Brock. Have there, and I don't know if this is part of the original study or if there's additional studies, are there any, is there any idea of what the long-term traffic impacts would be? I mean, let's assume it does relieve congestion. Congestion brings, I mean, I know I don't travel a lot of these roads specifically because of the congestion in the city. And so if the congestion were to be relieved, I might travel those roads again and thus more congestion. But is there any studies, are there any studies?
Well, I'm kind of hoping we can get the studies done to show that. The situation is, okay, you can go back to that other slide now. I'm proposing the road that uses 5 existing roads,
right,
and we connect them all. So instead, and it's a 15-mile road, so we only have to build half the new roads, about 7.5 miles of new road versus 15 miles. So those 7 roads, or those 5 roads that it connects to or crosses 20 different roads. Okay, so what that does, it provides driving alternatives, and it will provide over 100 different driving alternatives to connect to the 20 different roads.
Mm-hmm.
And driving alternatives, that's a city grid system, and the city grid systems have been proven to work well over time. They have the alternatives, so that people aren't on one major road, they can split up into different roads. Okay. Anyway, go ahead and next slide, please. Okay. Well, the Stafford County Planning Commission, I've sent them about 25 emails in the past 2 months, and because they're in the process of redoing the comprehensive plan, and they pretty much endorsed my proposal. They next week there's going to be a public hearing to add the interconnector roadway into the Stafford County Comprehensive Plan. Now they also left the old corridor in the plan. That basically this part of the corridor was studied in 1999, but I can tell you right now that the south part right here is obsolete. There's 2 subdivisions right here with with homes up to almost $1 million, and I don't think they're going to, wipe out 30, 40 homes at that price. So anyway, I think that's obsolete. Plus, it will interfere with the reservoir, impact the reservoir top. But anyway, I'm not necessarily opposed to this. section, north of 17. I think it's probably going to be needed. But what I think can happen is if the interconnector is built, that instead of 4 lanes here, you can probably get away with 2 lanes for another 20 years. So, and that way those 2 lanes can go away from the wetlands and so forth, and avoid it. So anyway, I'll go to the next page. Okay, now my proposal crosses Route 3, and where the Burger King is, the Burger King would probably have to go, unfortunately. But anyway, this here is back at the Mall Town Center. They already built a traffic circle here, and it's stubbed out, ready to go for the Mall Connector Road. In the late 2000s, Spotsylvania was on board with building a Mall Connector Road, but politics took its course and they killed it, unfortunately. But what I'm saying is, we got the infrastructure here, and we got 4 lanes here, 4 lanes here. So again, the traffic would be split up in the 2 different ways, and this Mall Connector Road, I didn't get a map of it, but I read in the newspaper article that it would come down and go and connect with Harrison Road, a 1/4 mile west of Hazel Wild Farm. But the problem now is there's a residential development probably right around in here that's being built, and it might create problems with that. They might be able to pull the road closer to 95 to avoid it, but that would have to be, studied. Okay, next page, please. Okay, now Fred bus, okay? Now, what I'm proposing is on the new road that we put in bus lanes, benches, shelters at the most populated areas, and the trail. See, the trail is going to enhance bus service because people will be able to use the trail to get to the bus stops. And the bus lanes, but basically the road connects the population centers on the west side of 95. We got Garrisonville Road area. We have Centerport that's getting ready for another 800 houses. We got England Run, which is close by. We got Stafford Lakes and senior community that's right on Celebrate Virginia Parkway. Go ahead and go to the next page. Okay, now I came back to this because what I'm saying is the Fred bus uses Route 1, but they use 95 a lot too. So that's kind of a waste for bus services. They're on 95, they're not picking up or dropping off anybody. So if we have 2 roads, 2 north-south roads that the bus can go on, the bus can drive in a loop. And not only that, but I'm saying let's have 2 different loops, one going clockwise and one going counterclockwise. That way, if there's congestion on one area, they can get off the bus, wait for the bus that's going the other direction, and jump on it and have an alternative route. So it'd make the bus service more reliable, and like I said, connects the population centers with not only to the population centers, but it connects to the work centers and the destination centers. I mean, the biggest employers in Stafford are Intuit and Geico, so it's within walking distance of the bus stop. So and then you have employment centers in the mall and in Central Park and so forth. So all those employment centers and destination centers are there. And you also have Embry Mill Park up here. The bus service
Mr. Chairman.
carry people from 17 up to Embry Mill Park and back again. And with the bus coming into by the stadium, yeah, so we can create a system where we don't need more parking for the stadium, but we can bus people to the stadium and cut down on initial costs and real estate for parking.
Joe, I'm going to cut you off at this point because there's some things I want to get done and not go too long. But I asked him to come, excuse me, to come tonight because there are some very possible viable options available if the political will is there. And they're not that expensive. And they make good use of existing infrastructure. Now, as I said, his may not be the best solution, but it's a good starting point as we consider how to ameliorate the issues of 95 and Route 1 and improve east-west mobility for not only Stafford, but ultimately for the other jurisdictions too. So with that, any other questions for?
Can I just go through it real quick?
No, I don't want to keep people here too late, Joe. I will ask you to go to his Facebook page to see the rest of the stuff.
It gets me 5 minutes.
I'm going to hold you to 4 minutes and 59 seconds.
Okay, next page. Okay, ambulance service. In parts of Stafford County and Spotsylvania County, the transport times will be reduced and response times will be reduced. And go to the next page. Okay, can you go back one? Another one. Okay. The Celebrate Virginia Senior Community here at Del Webb is 3 miles closer to Mary Washington Hospital if you go over the river crossing. Not only are they 3 miles closer, but there are 11 less traffic lights. So they can, and there's 4 calls a week. 4 911 calls a week are generated in this one senior community. Up here on Berea Church Road, there's 6 calls a week at this assisted living facility. I don't know how many of those calls generate transport time, but when you can transport quicker and the ambulances get back in service quicker, it's a big plus. Next 2 pages. Okay. Now the Planning Commission also liked my idea of turning the abandoned Cannon Ridge Golf Course into a regional park. So they designated the golf course as a park in the comprehensive plan, and it will come up for public hearing on next Tuesday. And next page. Okay, the trails in the park are have gone back to nature. And this is just one picture of it. Next page. There's 7 miles of paved trail on the golf course right now. There's also 10 miles of 18th century, not 19th century roads, 18th century roads that are in the city of Fredericksburg's conservation land. City of Fredericksburg owns over 1,000 acres. The golf course is 283 acres. So together, it could be a regional park of over 1,300 acres. And this is a lot of usable land here. Next page. There's already a clubhouse and parking, plus the trails. So it's instant park if we can acquire it. Next page. Okay. This waterfall is on city-owned land, and it's 0.7 miles from the golf course trail. Now, I got the Planning Commission to also include the Belmont to Cannon Ridge Golf Course waterfall, historic waterfall trail in the plan. Next page. This is Belmont, so the trail would go to Belmont, and then from there, hopefully it would go to Ferry Farm someday. Next page. Okay, Hunter's Iron Works is just one of the historic sites that would be on the trail, along with the canal systems, gold mines, and a mill and so forth. Okay. Celebrate Virginia Parkway would be a beautiful gateway into Fredericksburg and Stafford. It's got, it's 4 lanes already built. Again, there's the underused infrastructure. It's got a 9-foot wide trail here with street lights, all underutilized. Next page. Another part of Celebrate Virginia. Next page. And another part, you see the landscaping and trail and street lights. Next page. Okay, Celebrate Virginia Parkway has an underpass. And this underpass, this sidewalk area is 5 feet wide. So it's enough for the East Coast Greenway Trail to use that underpass. We'd have to put a guardrail on. But, so the trail could go underneath 17 without interfering traffic flow. And it'd be a lot safer. Next page. This covered bridge is on Berea Church Road, and it's in a perfect location where the covered bridge can be used for the East Coast Greenway Trail. Next page. That's it. See, it needs a little maintaining there. But, I've been in touch with the landowner, and they're considering selling it. Next page. Okay, this is the pedestrian plan for Stafford County. I'll go to the next, go here. Can you click this? No, go back. Okay, this is the regional plan. This green section.
Time, okay, Joe, got a couple.
Yeah. Okay, so this green section is the East Coast Greenway Trail that does use a portion of the interconnector.
Okay, any quick questions? Y'all want to take a fast 5-minute break and we'll take back up? Good idea. Let's take a quick 5-minute break and we'll resume.
For new people, the bathroom, we go straight this way to the left, there's 2 different bathrooms, for each
I'm glad it was new to somebody. That made it worth it.
Halfway, no, there's the other city that is connected to. Right, well, that's what it is. You take it straight across. But there's that subdivision there because on a part of the house. Yeah, I don't think it's possible to review. If you didn't do that. Feel free to threaten me. Some of the stuff that you brought up. committees, I mean, if I get this staff report.
Well, there's also another house of people's task force budget meeting saying, well, you have to be in this particular solution. I'm not having heard of that solution. And that doesn't matter. But you need to do something. So we see it over our tax collector and
Yes, I think it's more of a story. Do you want to see it or do you? I just wanted to warn you, your personal bubble.
That's fine.
Day here, actually, my daughter is here. I couldn't figure out how to do the parking either, and I was late to my interview, and I was like, I have for 15 minutes, I'm here. Yeah. No, it's fine.
oh, you got that.
Yeah, we tested out one time, but I didn't do it because at the time we had those name plates. Those, the name plates.
Yeah.
This, I can't see that.
Oh, I'm not crowding you. I can't tell my camera because of this. No, you're fine.
Okay, we get everybody back in session, and I didn't mean to cut off Joe, but I would like to get you home sometime tonight before it's too late. His presentation is important from my perspective to let you know that there are options out there that make sense, and it's something you should have in your toolbox as we continue forward. To refer back to incorporate, to embrace, to pick and choose. Now I guess the next item on the agenda is to approve the meeting minutes from the 8th September meeting.
So moved.
We have a motion to approve the minutes. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second, any discussion? There being no discussion, call for a vote. All those in favor of approving the minutes signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Old business. In your packet, I believe, is the letter that was drafted from the CTAC in response to a motion that I made at the last meeting and was given to the policy committee members. And Stacy will give you a little bit of feedback about the policy meeting, but I got some interesting feedback. One jurisdiction was adamantly in favor of it. Another jurisdiction was very supportive. Another jurisdiction was mildly skeptical. Well, I can tell you, Spotswood meeting was very supportive. Stafford was supportive. Fredericksburg was, we've been there, done that, got that t-shirt, at least from the comments that were verbalized. My read on that was they were a little bit surprised, but given the events that we're seeing on the highways, not unreceptive to reinvigorating the process. That was my perception from the reading of the letter. Stacey, anything you want to add from the policy meeting?
I did not attend, but I have notes from Adam Hager, our transportation planner. He did mention that the policy board did approve those transportation project lists that we looked at, you know, the big huge Excel sheets. And they did go ahead and approve the list as is. They did consider, as Hank said, the letter from CTAC saying that they would like consideration of another river crossing. They also considered about 9 public comments on that list, either asking for, you know, modifications to projects or expressing support of projects. They did approve the list because they said it was a time-sensitive matter. They had to get things going. But I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Hank, they did encourage CTAC to continue the conversation on alternative river crossings. So the second thing to report from the policy committee meeting, there was a presentation by one of our transportation consultants, and they presented information on the recommendations as a result of the Lafayette Boulevard traffic study. You can review that online. We do have a recording of it on the policy committee webpage. but also in your packets under staff reports, so item 11, there's a link to a Freelance Star article that summarizes what was said at that meeting. And in the interest of time, I will leave the policy committee report there.
Any other questions for Stacy about the policy meeting? By the way, the next one is Monday, next Monday at 6 p.m. here. You're all welcome to attend in a non-participation mode, but you can clearly listen in and make public comments. So that's here. It's an interesting group. It was a blessing. I'll get the next one. Okay, now public comment period.
We have not received any written public comments. Do we have anyone online who would like to share a comment with the committee?
Okay, there will be none. Next item on the agenda is the smart scale round fire update.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm talking about around 5. Some of you heard from the previous meetings.
We're good, Eric.
It's all muted.
As some of you know, at the previous committee meeting, previous CTAC meetings, and the previous policy committee meeting, we've had discussions regarding the FAMPO and Distributor Smart Scale projects. Now, what is Smart Scale? Smart Scale is basically the state of Virginia's funding allocation process reinstituted a few years ago. We are on round 5. It happens every 2 years. It selects which projects to receive state funding. So FAMPO and GVRC each receive 5 applications, and then our localities as well receive applications, as well as transit agencies, among others. So we submit 5 applications, and 4 projects go through for funding after the pre-application phase. We are currently in an initial phase for the, as Vito is calling them, initial intake forms, as we are calling them pre-applications. And then after this stage, we move forward with those applications and parsing them out with VDOT to figure out all the minor details, getting sketches, getting cost estimates, and so on for these projects. And then we move forward into next year. March, April, we do pre-applications. June, July, August, we submit the final applications. And then we hear back on funding in January of 2023. And then that goes to CTB that year. So we just got done with in June, CTB approved round 4. So now we're moving on to round 5. So submitted projects are scored based on smart scale factors and then prioritized based on their scores. Projects with the highest score, of course, are more likely to receive funding. And CTB reviews the scores, prioritizes the projects, and selects which projects to take funding, taking it from the initial scoring set. So SMART Scale is an acronym. It stands for the System for the Management and Allocation of Resources for Transportation. And SCALE conveys the factors used to evaluate a project's merit: safety, congestion, accessibility, land use, economic development, and environment. A SMART Scale round, of course, refers to the one full SMART Scale cycle, which lasts 2 years. And currently, we're on round 5, as mentioned. FAMPO staff took a different approach to previous years to selecting what our projects are. We basically said we want to use our LRTP prioritization methodology, which we had talked about at the last meeting, to basically do an initial staff review, staff score of our projects to select projects. So we used a number of factors. We received projects from our localities based on current and recent studies. We looked at how projects fared on recent rounds, the projects that were submitted again. We used our methodology, and project cost is, of course, unknown at this stage and is not factored in. So of the projects, scoring process that we use mimics SMART Scale in a way, but uses our own metrics. So these are the metrics that we use for the roadway and active transportation. I'll mention we used all metrics that were quantitative, that did not contain any subjective items in nature. So that's everything on this list apart from a couple of items inside each of these, and project benefit was given a neutral score as well. So those that were subjective measures were given a neutral score, so that was based off just data, rather than a opinion from a staff member or a politician on what projects are best to go through. So again, this is the schedule we've been at. with our technical advisory committee since May, going through the initial discussions, the review, project list, initial selection, and now we are in October with the intake forms and then moving forward into March of 2022. So our list of projects. So FAMPO and GWC, George Washington Regional Commission and Frederick Area MTO, we have 10 projects, 5 each. Well, as mentioned, we whittled down to 4 come April of next year. So starting with the GWC list, we're going to go through these projects, and there are specifics that we have at this time. Note that a lot of these are still, some of them, unlike this one, are more generalized in nature, and items are still being decided on what exactly is going to be in each application and how things will look. So those intake forms for those projects are due Friday. We don't have every single piece of information yet, but this is what we do have now. And I'm happy to answer questions on project specifics as I can. So Lake Hill Road intersection improvements at US 1. This was a previous round 4 Smart Scope application that received funding, but Stafford County elected to choose a movement through a different project instead. So they're applying for this again, basically just intersection and access management improvements at US 1 and Lake Hill Road, as shown on the screen here. US 1 going north, Lake Hill Road going eastbound. And this is basically just
Mr. Chairman, may I chime in, please?
It also includes a few transit improvements as well. Center Court Park.
Hello?
This is one of the current studies that VDOT is undergoing, what is called a pipeline study. And it will look to address needs along Center Court Parkway and at US 1. So this map here on the screen is showing in the unshaded area, the highlighted area, the general area where the project and the study is looking at for improvements. And we'll see kind of what comes out of that. We're not sure yet on what specific improvements we will see at the time.
We have a question from
Yeah.
Jane online.
Go for it.
Sorry, it was on you.
It's Jane Leeds. About the SMART project. None of them relate to any areas of concern for people who are disabled. And that is part of the mission statement of the 2 planning organizations. Safety and accessibility are probably the 2 largest quantitative basis for those projects. And there's none. There's nothing in the projects or any of the grid or things that have been outlined for the roadways or transportation or anything related to the disabled population. There is a significant problem for that because we do not have, and I am disabled myself, I use the transit system or have used the transit system, tried to use the transit system. There are significant obstacles and barriers in our infrastructure, and none of those have been addressed.
Yeah, so let me see if I can answer that. So a few of the projects, when we look at that, in a generalized nature, a lot of the projects do go through and look at safety and accessibility improvements. And we'll, as I go through the list, I'll do a little bit better job of pointing out what some of those may be for the projects. And some of them do specifically include transit improvements, for instance. So again, some of them are still being, a lot of them are still being fleshed out in regards to their specific improvements.
Matt, could I just comment on this? Sorry, because you may get multiple questions on the same concept over and over. I hope you can hear me online, but I would like to just make a couple of clear points quickly on this issue. The first one is that almost all of these projects include sidewalks, and you may not any longer build a sidewalk without it being ADA compliant. So the projects in that list don't have every little detail spelled out because we're early in the design phase of these projects, but almost all of them include at least one sidewalk. Sometimes, for example, the Lafayette Boulevard project includes sidewalks and a multi-use park on both sides of the road. And those have to be ADA compliant when you build them now. You can't build a sidewalk new and not make it ADA compliant. So from the point of view of sidewalks, most of them have a sidewalk, and those sidewalks will have to be ADA compliant. Secondly, a number of them do include new facilities for buses, and not a ton of them, but there are some of those projects which include new facilities for buses, and those facilities also have to have accommodations like a sidewalk and various other facilities. So it might not appear to you right now that that is all happening, but that is because these projects have not been designed in minute detail. When we submit them on Friday, VDOT staff will be doing detailed design and costing and all of the background work that is required to submit these finally next year. And that work includes examining whether those projects include sidewalks, and the ADA compliant requirements for those sidewalks. So I can assure you those items at least are being included in most of the projects. There may be one or two where a sidewalk has not been included, but the bulk.
Well, we're not only talking about sidewalks. We're talking about audible signals so people can cross a busy intersection. It's great if you have a sidewalk, but if you can't get to it, it doesn't do you any good. You can't ride a bus in one direction all day long. Well, you can if you have the time, but not everybody does. And so you have to, at some point, cross the street. There are no audible signals in this county, not one. I've looked for them. How do you cross the street if you don't have an audible signal to get you safely across?
So, ma'am, that is something which we can discuss with VDOT on these particular projects. It's not something I can answer in this meeting, but we can certainly put.
Well, what particular project would have something for us? I'm talking about, we have a new VA administration building coming in to Spotsylvania County in 2024. And a lot of those veterans, men and women, who have served this country well, to their own detriment. And if they can't use public transit because ADA specification sidewalks and all the other little barriers and obstacles prevent them from accessing that facility, and there's no way for them to safely cross the street if they're in a wheelchair or with a walker or they're with a service dog because they're blind or hearing impaired or both. How do we answer those people? You also have people who will be working there. Some of them will be poor or not have very much money and can't afford a car. They have to ride transit. Do they have access? Do you have to walk in a road to get to the bus stop? That's my situation right now. I'm trapped in my community because there's no sidewalk for me to get to the bus stop a quarter mile away from my community. I can't go to CVS, which is just around the corner from my house, because there's no sidewalk. I have to walk with a service dog. I can't walk in the road. I can't cross the street to go to the library when I get off the bus because there's no audible signal.
Is anybody telling me?
I'm not the only blind person in Spotsylvania County.
She's a committee member. She's a committee
Hey,
member.
what? She's a committee member.
So why don't I go through, I'll finish the presentation and go through the specific projects, and emphasize what the safety improvements are, the accessibility improvements are, the bicycle and pedestrian improvements are, and if there are questions at the end, we can discuss further. So with Lay Hill Road, as mentioned, there were roadway access management improvements, and there were improvements to the curbs, to the sidewalks, to the transit. There's going to be addition of a new bus stop, a new bus shelter, as well as crosswalks along segments of the roadway. Centerport Parkway, as I mentioned, this project is still under study, and we do not know of any specific improvements at this time that will come out of it. Hopefully sometime early next year, we'll have more information on Centerport Parkway. Warrenton Road, US 17 bus bike ped improvements. This is a project that came out of a US 17 STAR study from I think 2018, 2017. And part of it, the sidewalk was applied for in the last round of Smartsville, and it's being applied for again to increase the pedestrian access along US 17 Warrenton Road, an area that, one of the areas mentioned that has no pedestrian access at this time. So it's looking at bicycle and pedestrian improvements along this section of roadway from Old Forge Drive to Solomon Drive. And this will just be a basic sidewalk improvement. I don't believe it crosses any roadways or any needed crosswalk improvements, but not sure of the specifics at this time for every crossing.
Just one quick question.
Well, what I'm talking about is that we allow builders to come into our communities and not build sidewalks, or they only build them within the residence areas, but they're not contiguous to anything outside of that area.
Yeah, and I think
so that's you know, there's no contiguous system of sidewalk for people to go to parks or to go to schools or to go to shopping or to go to anywhere. There is, you know, we're imprisoned and the transit system isn't accessible, even with their diversions that they allow, because they forget you. I've been abandoned by a Fred bus on a very cold February afternoon, waiting outside in frigid weather for 40 minutes. I called them and they said, oh, the bus is coming, but it's from the other direction. They'll be there in about 20 minutes. I've been out there for 40 minutes. It doesn't work.
Let me interject at this point.
You know, I am a very vulnerable person. I don't have a lot of resources to call upon. I'm not rich. I don't know a lot of people here. I'm not from here. And, you know, there are very few resources available. The shared ride service is overburdened.
Okay.
You can't get rides half of the time because they're full up.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to take the discussion back to me, if you would inform our speaker that. As a general rule, and this sort of segues into a thing I'd like to get to tonight, we can't unring what has been done. Potentially, we can with a fairly substantial investment if the assets are available, but we can, as an advocacy group, insist that things like audible signals and accessible sidewalks are made an integral part of everything from this point forward. And I don't mean to cut you off. I understand your frustration, but at this point, we want to ensure from this point forward, we're doing the right thing, and then to the degree we can, correct those things that still need to be fixed that have been done previously. Are you finished with your presentation?
There's another 5 slides on the rest of the project.
Okay, and a quick question?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm looking at the map here. It's only going as far as Old Forge, it's not gonna go under the 95.
Correct. This project is just going along Old Forge to Solomon Drive for now.
Can I ask why? Because under that bridge, walking on that bridge,
I-
sidewalks would be a pedestrian walkway
Yeah.
through there or like.
So this was a project that was submitted by Stafford County, and these were the segments that were submitted. I do not have a specific reason for why they were not interested in.
I hope you're going to be an advocate, because that's exactly.
Same
So-
question, it's absolutely
Well, I
changed.
am an advocate for our pedestrians here.
Well, no, that's it.
Committee, I'm an advocate for public transportation. on all aspects.
No, absolutely. And this is this gets into what I would like to talk about. Please finish your slide and then we're gonna, because I don't want to keep you here too late, but I think.
I would. Okay, I'll skim through the rest of this pretty quickly, just so you guys overview the Smart Scale project. The Route 2 improvements, this is looking at a widening of the roadway on Route 2 to connect with the previous round Smart Scale project, as well as bicycle and pedestrian improvements up Route 2, along what the city is calling their Mayfield connector into downtown, as well as an addition, which is not shown on the map here, Dixon Park connector up along the back way here under blue and gray, and then a access roadway to the Brewery parking lot with a roundabout at blue and gray as well.
And all of those are brand new sidewalks which have to be ADA compliant, all of it, everything you just mentioned.
The next project here is the 5th Lafayette Boulevard roadway and bike path improvements. Some of you who were on the committee last round might remember Lafayette Boulevard multimodal improvements. This is a second part to that project. We are filling in the gap on sidewalks that was left out from those projects. And we are also we are also doing several roadway improvements that came out of the Lafayette Boulevard Highway study that Stacy mentioned was presented at the policy committee meeting. VCR regional project, this is basically an all-encompassing project for the VCR trail to connect the VCR trail from Harrison Road in Spotsylvania County, a VCR trail tunnel under I-95, an extension to Idlewild, Hazel Run, bridge over US 1, potential bridge over US 3, which is not included here, and then connecting to downtown and all the way over to the Chatham Bridge. Again, some of these are slightly outdated. I-95 widening, this is one of the projects that Stephen was talking about that we are looking to do for Smart Scale. Again, as a part of this project is a supplement, including a VCR trail tunnel under I-95 and rebuilding the bridge at Harrison Road, widening it, and then a widening of I-95 along this whole portion from 4 lanes each way, 3 lanes to 4 lanes each way. Route 3 Gordon Road pipeline project, not sure the details yet. It will come out in the next couple months and into next year. But this is along Route 3 from Gordon Road. It's actually been changed now to Andorra Drive, which is just past here, to I-95, looking at specific improvements along that roadway. US 1, last lane to Idlewild Boulevard, the city to Spotsy, looking at improvements along this section of Route 1. And then the last project,
Pipeline study?
Yeah, the pipeline study is what VDOT is calling their, I guess, a targeted study to look for improvements to specifically put in for Smart Scale applications. I believe they have 5 per VDOT districts, and we've seen, I think, 3 of them here that are looking to do for Smart Scale applications. So it's just a small study to look at roadway, bicycle, pedestrian improvements to fit with V-Trans needs. So they're in progress. We don't know details yet, sadly. So we'll hopefully know those in the coming months as those studies wrap up in the next year. Mass Pines Corridor, this is a US 1 started study, I believe, looking at targeted improvements along the US 1 corridor from Stafford County, Spotsylvania County, near exit 126, just south at Commonwealth Drive, all the way down to southern Spotsylvania County, Mud Tavern Road, Arcadia Road, looking at shared use path and targeted roadway improvements. That's the last slide. So, thank you.
Any questions for me?
Good job.
Okay, last point on the agenda, I'm going to go over these slides pretty quickly because it is late, but I want to give you some sense of why I tracked. First time I came to CTAC, there's an awful lot of stuff that you all need to be involved in, but not necessarily everybody needs to be involved in everything. We want to ensure the right things are done in the right areas from a regional perspective. So I put together some slides I'd like you to consider, and then we'll get to them in a little bit more detail at the next meeting. We currently have a purpose, but we don't have a mission statement. And as I mentioned in my first meeting, I want us to be advocates. We can rise above the politics and the jurisdictions that appointed us and look at these issues from a regional perspective. And once we do that, then we should fight viciously. No, that's not the right word. We should fight forcefully. I'm turning over kind of gently. Freudian. We should fight forcefully for the regional solutions. And that's why I think we need to become an advocacy group. Now, along with that mission statement, we need to establish priorities. I think the very first thing that has to be solved, because like bad fish, it doesn't get better with age, is to find solutions to mitigate the congestion along our major traffic corridors, not only for the convenience of our citizens, but our economic viability for this region and the entire East Coast. Because this issue, I think, is absolutely critical. Right behind that is to improve access to mass transit, and that covers a wealth of things. That could be VRE, that could be ride sharing, that could be FRED, that could be all sorts of things that allow us to use alternative means of transportation as a mitigation strategy for the bigger picture. And then finally, ensure safety of our roads for our population. And that segues exactly right into what our member who was participating remotely was concerned about. So in order to do that and to make sure that we give the very focused look, I would propose that we create subcommittees or focus groups aligned with each one of these priorities, so that each one of these focus groups would take upon itself to zero in their interests, their time and attention, because it's unreasonable for me or anybody else to expect all of you to be conversant on every issue. First time I was handed a project list of 250 projects, my head hurt. And I couldn't give it what I considered good enough due diligence to ensure that things like the sidewalk extension under 17, or some of the ADA issues that were being addressed by our member participating remotely are involved. But I would see those focus groups doing just that kind of thing. So what would be the roles and the responsibilities of the focus groups? Well, they, again, from a regional perspective, would look at that laundry list and review, prioritize, and recommend projects within all of that that pertain to their focus group that serve the region best. And I'll be the first one to tell you that I've seen some projects submitted by Stafford that were nice. If you want to give me $3.5 trillion, I'll put them on the list. But we are resource constrained. They don't rise to the cut level. But that, I'm looking at that, I believe, from a regional perspective. But I'm sure you've seen similar things. You become the subject matter experts within your focus area. And in a departure from future meetings, when there are written comments that are provided, I would ask that the focus group either take action upon it or recommend action rather than us reading written comments. Now, we're going to get some short-term comments in the future, I'm sure. We can address those at the meeting. But I think the focus group would look at that. Part of their responsibility would be to say, yeah, that makes sense, and this is what we're going to do. Send it over to the appropriate city agency, or maybe bring it back to the larger group that say, we need to deal with this as a bigger issue. A big one is, within your focus area, figure out how we move the ball forward. Who do we need to talk to? Who do we need to build consensus from? And as I said, I'm not adverse to getting in front of any group with a suit, coat and tie, and advocating for a CTAC solution to a regional problem, even if it may be anathema to a certain group in a jurisdiction that may not be politically aligned with it. We are going to upset people, I guarantee you. We're going to get people mad. And I've only got so many heartbeats left in this world, and I don't care if I expend them on doing something like this. But it's about time we look at our responsibilities from a regional perspective and then fight like the Dickens to make it happen. And the beauty of this is we can't be removed by the politicians who put us up on the board. Do I understand that correctly in bylaws?
That's not correct.
No, they can't.
We serve at the pleasure of the board of supervisors.
Depending on who. At large serves at the pleasure of policy, at large members.
Yes, but the jurisdiction, your jurisdiction has to nominate you to this committee, and presumably they can withdraw that on this.
Okay, well, you know, if they want to fire me tomorrow, that's okay too.
Be careful of that statement, but I mean, that's a good intention you have. But since I've been here, since 2016, we have been regional. You know, the only regional where we miss the mark on is King George and Caroline.
Well, no, you're correct. Now, that may be a bigger issue.
Now, that's something that we could tackle, and the policy committee and also look at that. And I don't know where they are with that right now. David, have you heard anything on that recently about King George and Caroline?
It will depend on the results of the census.
Oh, the census, okay. There you have it.
I'm sorry, to the again?
The census will determine, it's based on,
Yeah.
on
Population.
population of the service.
Okay, can I give you a way down on that? I think they should be incorporated, but I'm not sure what is involved to do that.
I'm not trying to take the smoke.
No, that's okay.
I like your fire, but, we have to be careful in that aspect. And one of the things that, on top of that, just to add to that, me personally, I'd like to have a closer relationship with my supervisor for the area I live in. But I don't think he's running. We're gonna have a new one. And wards are gonna change. So maybe it's time we invited them, because they go to the policy committee, but we invited them into our meetings, at least one. And I'll bet if you poll them, I don't think any of them have been in the last couple of years or maybe before.
Well, some of these guys I have been to the policy committee, not necessarily.
That's the only place we cross swords is up at the policy committee, and that would be you. And we can go, but we go as citizens. We don't go as members of CTAC.
Personally, I'm open to, you bring anybody you want to these kind of meetings.
Yeah.
And I want them to hear the conversation, because the last thing we want to do is operate in secrecy. Because there are going to be times when we have to advocate for stuff, and it's going to be contrary to what a board may think, and we're going to have to make the case. Because again, realizing they think locally, we've got to think regionally, I believe. Now, if we do something like that, then these focus groups would be the staff reports. They'd be the member reports, where they come in and give us the Cliff Notes version of where we are, so that we're all up to speed. Yes, sir.
Do you want to touch on why we're doing focus group and not subcommittee?
I personally don't care the name.
Well, no, I'm saying because one of the reasons why we had talked about not doing subcommittee is because you're talking about staff
That's
support.
your matter. Okay.
Yeah, no, it was the staff support that you would need for that. Then you would have to schedule the meetings. You would have to be in here for that. Then there's FOIA issues. So we were talking about.
Yes and no.
Yeah.
No, and we'll talk about that in just a second. He raises a good point, and this is part of the difficulty involved in breaking down what you call focus groups or subcommittees. There is, if we compartmentalize a little bit, exchanging of information has to be very attuned to the requirements of FOIA. You know, two members can email one-on-one, two members can go sit down and have coffee. If you need to have the larger group, then we have to provide advanced warning to Stacy so that it can be announced, staff can be made available. It has to follow all the FOIA wickets. And we would want to do that by exception, but there may be times when that's required. But if you're part of one of these committees, there's a lot of internal communication, whether it's a phone call or it's an email, but you got to be careful that we don't violate FOIA. It's the only alternative I can think of, given an organization that has a lot of stuff to look at, one meeting a month and potentially 2 hours, unless you want to camp out here all night. So consider that. Again, I'm not going to ask you to vote on or do anything, but I want to explain the rationale for why you see the things on the slide that you do. Now, if we do that, we would take this organization and we'd spend some consecutive meetings zeroing in on one of those focus groups at a time. Now, you can see on the calendar, and obviously November is not going to work, that I said, well, November, December, January would be the congestion mitigation focus group, and that's what we would really focus on. Obviously, that can slide or the priority can change. But this way, we zero in on something and study it a little bit more intensely than doing a broad brush to the large issues involved in everything that could potentially fall under the CTAC umbrella. That's basically it, what I wanted to discuss. Any quick questions? We'll get into a little bit more discussion about this as whole business at the next meeting, but I wanted to give you a sensing for how I'd like us to move forward so that we are productive focused, regional, and when necessary, obnoxious. Yes, sir.
Yeah, Josh Brock. It's not really a question. Part of my background is in organization and management. And one of the things I noticed when I joined the board a couple of years ago is this idea of CTAC's identity within the greater FAMPO interaction. And so I was wondering, I don't know if this is even possible. Is it possible for me to give a presentation before this group? I'd like to do that because there is an underlying structure of good, well-designed organizations that I think would be really useful for us to take kind of a quick overview of. Just because understanding CTAC's intended role and its sort of best option in the greater organizational scheme, I think would really help us if we're trying to design a different way of CTAC operating.
Okay, sounds good. Anybody else have any questions or comments of a general nature?
Just from staff side, I would just suggest that you invite Stacy to just give you at your next meeting on this topic, a thumbnail overview of what FOIA requirements would be if you had a subcommittee meeting. Just the kind of high points.
Yeah, she's provided that to me. Basically, if you screw it up, she goes to jail and I follow. And so we're very much concerned because we want to be in compliance with the law and open. Now, if we get down to this structure and we flesh it out, we'll provide you checklists and guidelines and focus group or commission, operating procedures, and I'll help track that because I don't want to impose an additional burden. I would just like us to organize for combat.
It's in simple things like you have to provide notice to the public if you're going to have a subcommittee. You have to take minutes.
Now, subcommittee being 3 or more.
Yeah, 3 or more people. You have to make sure that you're accessible. So you can't be in a location where people can't get access to. And it's these kinds of things which FOIA requires us to do. So Stacey's a real expert on the details of it.
Any other general questions or comments? Then I would say that I have saturated you with information. I appreciate everybody's attention. And if there are no other comments or questions from our online participation or in person, I would entertain a motion to adjourn. I see hands. Okay, second.
Yep.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much.
We didn't get to this on the other page, but if committee members want these resources, as Tamara brought up, like concerns about why doesn't the sidewalk extend